Money with Santosh Sirur.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Sound of Money. And today on The Sound of Money, we have our very familiar face, not just on our show, but on a lot of television channels, business news channels. Madan Sabnavis is here with us. Hi, Madan. Welcome to Sound of Money once again.
Hello, Santosh. Nice to be here.
Hi. And yes, Madan, as we all know, he's been 30 plus years into banking and finance and been looking at banking and finance and even the economy on a very different level. He is currently the Chief Economist for CARE Ratings. And of course, his book that we spoke about in our previous episodes, Hits and Misses, basically the highs and lows of the Indian banking industry. And Madan has been one who has seen the industry ever since the liberalization days. So, once again, Madan is on our show and we're going to talk about the current trends in the Indian economy, the macroeconomics. So my first question to you, Madan, where are we on the Indian economy? A very generic question, but if you could just give us a taste of where are we heading?
I think the Indian economy is very well positioned right now. And I think all the apprehensions that we had about the third wave, I think now are behind us. Yeah. Because we do believe that even in case there's a third wave due to the vaccination drive, the impact will not be that severe. And more importantly, there will not be any more economic lockdowns, definitely not any kind of a severe lockdown. And as we're looking at the economy today, though there is a big advantage of the base year advantage because we had negative growth last year. But even if you look at different sectors on their own, I think everything is looking upwards. Manufacturing definitely was already in the upward mode from July onwards, which seems to be continuing. And more importantly, if you look at the services sector, which have still been buffeted quite a bit in the sense that if you look at things like hospitality, media, entertainment, tourism, they are opening up gradually, but we do believe that probably post-Diwali, things will actually accelerate. And maybe by the end of March, we would be in a very strong position from where we can look at accelerated growth.
Okay. The PLI scheme, the government announced PLI seems to have kicked off pretty well. Initially, there were hiccups, but I think overall it has kicked off well. Do you think the scheme may extend into various other industry sectors?
I think, Santosh, we need to see because I think the PLI is significant because it's a different way in which the government is trying to prop up the economy. See, normally earlier the case was where you gave subsidies. You kept giving lots of money to various sectors in different ways. It can be an interest rate subvention, it can be a cash subsidy or whatever, or debt forgiveness or whatever we are looking at. But here the government is saying very clearly to various sectors which are included in the PLI that you are supposed to invest a certain amount of money. You're supposed to generate a certain amount of output. And this has to be done over a period of 5 years. In case you do so, then you get the subsidy in terms of a return which could average something like 5% of your turnover. So I think it's a very good change in thought. Now, the important thing, Santosh, is whether it will really pick up or not. Because we have seen interest shown by a number of companies which have applied for the PLI schemes, depending upon which ministry has announced it. Lots of them have actually done it. Now, it's important to see as to whether they are able to accomplish these things. And I've seen in the past that while doing the investment is fair enough, but the producing output on a sustained basis, because the government is talking of incremental output over 2019-20, which was a kind of a normal year, will of course be the challenge. So the government will give the money only in case you're able to accomplish it. There will of course be exceptions for any slippages which take because of changes in the business cycle. But you will have to perform to do it. And definitely this is something which I'm sure can be extended not just to industry, but also to other sectors.
Okay. Talking about the government's disinvestment, right? The Air India one, and looks like we are almost out there and it's all set to fly. So what are your views on the disinvestment program? And we were pretty hopeful when the budgets were announced last year, and this was one of the action items. And now it seems we are all out there. So do you think this could really kickstart the plans finally for the Indian government?
Actually, we look at disinvestment, look at Air India. I think this has been an issue which has been on the table for quite some time. And I think the basic problem which you have is you have a very strong company, a very strong infrastructure, a very good staff. I think everything is accomplished about it. However, the problems which you have had is that it's been run by the government. So therefore, there's a lot of public sector to it. And above all, there was this case of accumulated losses and high amount of debt levels. So I think that was the main challenge why things were not moving forward. And now it looks like that from what we have read in the media, that the Tatas could be very much interested. There was some news that even SpiceJet could be interested. So in case I think this particular thing does happen, it will be a major achievement for the government. But I'm quite sure that the terms are such that a large part of the debt will have to be taken on by the government through an SPV. It's not something which the acquiring company would be in a position to do so. Now, trying to interpret this from the overall level of disinvestment policy, I think the problem with disinvestment is it's very company specific. So you're talking of LIC, we are talking in terms of certain public sector banks. I think each particular company or each particular area is a major challenge for the government and will be a major achievement. Because I think bringing it forward itself is a brave idea. The idea of disinvesting LIC, the idea of doing it for public sector banks, all these things have been spoken of, never really been put into action. So I think there's a lot of work which is going on. Even from LIC, we hear that they're looking at lots of those managers who they're trying to hire or bring on board so that you're able to expedite it. It may or may not really happen in the financial year. So it could be deferred, but just like Air India, which took a couple of years before it actually is becoming probably a reality, I think we should be a bit more patient in that.
Okay. So, Madan, if you look at it at this point in time, the vaccination rates are quite encouraging. There are records broken. You also have COVID per se also relatively manageable across the country, in spite of the fact that India is a big country, as we all know. Do you think this is the right time for the reigniting of the Indian investments?
Absolutely. I think this is the right thing. And the way I look at it is that we had several policies which were announced by the government last year under Atmanirbhar Bharat. Okay, at that time, lots of us, including myself, I think we were critical of it, saying that it didn't really address the immediate issue of the suffering which people went through on account of the lockdown. There was, of course, free food which was given to the very poor people. But otherwise, it was more or less in terms of a policy package which had the medium term in mind. So now if I come forward 1 year, I think we have made a lot of progress, as you rightly said, in terms of the vaccination. And it just looked like that from 22-23 onwards, we can look at India actually being geared to go to a high growth path, a real high growth path. This year also we'll be having a good number, but it'll be more of a statistical illusion rather than a real number. And I think this is where this entire policy package of the government, which includes your PLI, it includes your disinvestment, asset monetization scheme, and lots of other things, power sector reforms, which they spoke of. I think everything is going to actually come together and we can expect better times from 22-23 onwards. I would tend to think that 23-24 will be the year when we'll be absolutely normal and actually be confident to say that India is back on the 8% growth path.
Okay, but then there are a bit of, and of course, it's not an India-specific issue, but there are certain global supply chain problems, for example, the chips for that matter. So do you think these kind of issues could impact the certain industries in India, especially the automobile industry, etc.?
Absolutely. Today, if you look at the automobile sector, I think they are affected, especially the passenger cars. They have been affected because of the non-availability of chips. And this is something of a transition phase, because we've had a case of the entire world economy going into a slump last year. And now suddenly there's been a resurgence in terms of overall demand reviving. So we don't have the production capacities coming back on fold in all the countries. So I think that's the reason why we're having a demand-supply mismatch. In fact, even today, for a very broader commodity like oil, it's not even, we're not talking of chips. I think essentially the reason why the price is going up is because of the demand-supply mismatch. OPEC, of course, had to contribute a little bit because of the production cuts which they had invoked. But today, when you're talking of a sudden rise in demand and we don't have the ability to scale up immediately, I think that's why we're seeing this impact in terms of higher crude oil prices. The same thing holds for chips, which one assumes. It's been on for a long time, I'll admit, but it's something which will get resolved. But there will be uneven growth to that extent. There'll be certain sectors which will be the front runners, especially those in the infrastructure space. And there'll be others, like specifically the automobile sector, which could be a kind of a laggard, not really a laggard, but something which will trail the infrastructure sector.
Yeah, I wanted to know your view, your take on the Indian stock markets. I mean, they are just booming each and every day. But, well, do you think this is a bubble or what's your take on the Indian stock market?
See, if you look at the stock market on a long-term basis, when I'm saying a long term, if I look at the last 30 years, we generally see a very positive correlation between how the economy does and how the stock market does behave. Of course, in between, there will be lots of volatility because on a daily basis or a monthly basis, I think specific events can actually push up the index or bring it down. So that is something which we have seen, and that's what the market is all about. Now, in terms of these levels, of course, it's being driven partly by fundamentals, or rather I would say partly by expectations of strong fundamentals in future, which we all agree upon. At least I have agreed upon it on your show, that things are going to look forward. And most of the time we say that the stock market is forward-looking. So when I say it's forward-looking, it's essentially a case of saying that you think companies are going to do well because the economy is going to do well and earnings are going to be better. And that is what is getting reflected in terms of the stock prices. Now, is something like 60,000 Sensex justified? Yes, that can always be a debate on that, because I think 60,000 seems to be an overvaluation. Given the fact that we are still not out of the woods, potentially, yes, the worst is behind us. But if I look at the situation, say in March 2020, just before the pandemic and today, we have of course come a long way. But have we actually justified something from 30,000 to 60,000? I'm not quite sure about it. So there could be a bit of exaggeration which is taking place. And another factor, Santosh, in India is that because of this heavy lowering of interest rates by the Reserve Bank of India, which has been done to prop up the economy, I think savers have very few options. So we've seen a lot of migration of savings of households. And I'm not quite sure if they know if they're taking informed decisions or they're just running with the crowd. I think that could be the problem, that in case there's a kind of a correction which takes place, the common man could feel a bit disheartened, disillusioned, and that could be a bad thing. But we've already seen 60,000, we were euphoric, now it's come down to 59, probably 58,000. So there's already some kind of a correction which is taking place. But we should remember it's a zero-sum game. Somebody is gaining, somebody is losing. It shouldn't be that it's the desperate household which was getting 4-5% interest in a bank deposit who's ventured into the market and got his fingers burnt.
Okay. And what's your view on the rupee, the Indian rupee? Is it going to be stronger or is it going to be weaker? Or where do you think, especially looking at the global markets and a lot of geopolitical issues around, that we are seeing of late?
No, Santosh, the way I look at the rupee is that we need to look at the fundamentals and we need to look at the external factors. External factors, we have no control over them. So today we see that with the dollar strengthening, and this has happened ever since the Federal Reserve said that they would be increasing interest rates and rolling back on the quantitative easing. I think the dollar has started strengthening, and that has been seen in terms of weakening of currencies across the world. There, I think we have no control. If the dollar keeps strengthening and becomes stronger and stronger, the rupee is going to weaken. If I look at the fundamentals, they appear to be fairly strong. That's where I have a lot of comfort out there. And the ultimate thing is that if I'm adding dollars to my kitty, if my forex reserves are increasing, it means that the fundamentals on the whole are okay. So if I have a positive current account surplus, that is what the RBI has just indicated for the first quarter, which probably may carry on, but may move to a deficit. But then our capital account is fairly strong. We have lots of FPI coming in. ECB borrowings are picking up. FPI, of course, are whimsical, but as long as they're positive, they could be providing support to the overall balance of payments. So I think that the rupee is fundamentally stable. Our projection was that we'll be between 74, 74 and a half by the end of the year. And I think that's where we'll probably be headed. It could be, of course, fluctuations. I could go to 75, 75 and a half in case the dollar starts strengthening. In fact, when the QE actually is rolled back, we can see the dollar strengthening even further. Today, we're just working on the basis of announcement effects. But when it actually happens, we could actually see that the dollar is weakening a bit, but there will be the correction and we go back to the 74, 74 and a half range.
Okay. One area that has been talked about is the way the Reserve Bank of India has managed the currency, managed the markets, managed, I think, overall economy vis-a-vis quite a few other countries, right, where the apex banks have had challenges, including the US Fed. So do you think the RBI policy, RBI strategy has been fantastic?
See, the RBI strategy is quite different from those of other central banks. And I would tend to think that when we're talking of what the RBI has done, I think that's, in a way, I could say that it has not allowed the markets to function. So we have had a lot of liquidity infusion, which has actually kept bond yields down. Maybe an economy like India should have been having higher interest rates, but because the focus was so much on growth, we actually had lots of liquidity infusion, which made sure that the economy remained where it was on the right path. Similarly, in terms of currency, we see that when the rupee starts appreciating, there is intervention by the RBI. It doesn't want the rupee to appreciate too much. When it depreciates, I think it's more comfortable in the current situation. So I think the RBI has been I would say, to a certain extent, micromanaging the economy, which probably under these conditions is justified. But once I think we're out of the woods, I think ideally we should let the markets play their role.
Okay. Well, that's been an amazing discussion with you, Madan, on a whole lot of issues. And I think you come on our episode after a long time. So there were so many points that I wanted to talk to you about. So glad to have you once again on The Sound of Money, and always a pleasure to have you on The Sound of Money, Madan. Thank you so much for joining us.
In fact, thanks a lot, Santosh, for calling me again.
Thank you.
Sound of Money with Santosh Sirur.